Hi guys, welcome back to the Mina Does Art Stuff YouTube channel. My name is Mina and on this channel we do art stuff. Today I am going to be swatching out the full range of the Mijello Mission Gold watercolours. I got this dot card a while ago from Art and Miranda. I will link the haul video where I showed it, and I will also leave a link to the website if you want to go and check it out. It comes with dots of all of their different colours. It's really interesting because they've got these like foam pads to separate the colours, the sheets, and they're bent on the edges to stop the actual colour swatches from sticking to each other, which I thought was interesting. So we have 4 sheets of swatches here to go through, and I will go through all of them. But what I'm probably going to do, I've had to open the window because it's really warm today when I'm filming this, is I'm probably going to do most of this either as a voiceover or sped up with a bit of voiceover and some music. So you guys can really just enjoy watching the swatching process. I will try and zoom it in so you can see a bit closer up. And then what I will do, if there's enough colour left, which looks like there should be, I might take a few of my favourite colours and swatch them out on cotton watercolour paper so you can get an idea of how they react on different papers. It seems to be watercolour paper, but I doubt it's 100% cotton. I don't think it's even 300 GSM, which is fine for like a swatch card. But I feel like to give you the best sort of view of these colours, it might be worth swatching them on cotton paper as well, or at least the ones that I think are quite standout colours, to see how they look on different papers. You get an information sheet that comes with it as well that lets you know how to read the information on the swatches. So their light fastness ratings go from 1 star to 5 stars, with 5 stars being extremely light fast. Then they've got the transparency, opacity ratings. So a clear square is transparent, a clear square with a line through it is semi-transparent, a half-filled square is semi-opaque, and a fully filled square is opaque. Then we have staining, the staining triangle symbol, so blank is non-staining, half-filled is semi, and fully filled is a staining colour. You've got the colour indexes, and then sort of how you can, like the different chemical classes, and like whether they're organic or inorganic colours, which I thought was interesting. Oh, and they also have series A to H, which describes the price group, so A being the cheapest, H being the most expensive. So that's that. Move that out of the way. So like I said, I will be doing swatches. I'll be painting out these swatches on this paper on camera, and then I will probably do some of them off camera on cotton paper, and then come back at the end and have a little chat about what I think of them. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I will see you guys at the end of it. Hey guys, back again. It is now the next day. It took a lot longer to do the swatching on the cotton paper than I expected, and then I had to go pick up my daughter, and then the lighting wasn't great. Anyway, we're here now to finish this off. Sorry for any camera shaking. I'm not sure why it's shaking because the camera is mounted on a separate tripod. Anyway, so here are the swatches on the paper the dots came on, and you do get pretty sizable dots. Most of the samples still have a decent amount left even after I went through and did a second swatch from a lot of them, and I did larger swatches as well, which I'll show you in a minute. So this was the first sheet of swatches, from the yellows down to like some reds and pinks. One thing I wanted to note here is recently Roman Schmall came out with a few new colours, and one of them was a PY138 quinothalone yellow, which I got in a recent art haul, and you'll have seen, if you've seen my Roman Schmall palette update video, I will try and remember to link that below as well. You'll see I got that colour and I've added it in. I find it's a very nice cool yellow without being too green leaning. Like, it's not quite as cool as a lemon, but it's a really good cool yellow. Mission Gold also do this colour. Now, I've not seen it for sale on Jackson's. Jackson's sells Mijello Mission Gold watercolours open stock, but they don't seem to include this pigment. I don't think they carry the full range, but but I have found it online through other sources. Like, I've seen Mijello Mission Gold paint sold open stock on websites like AliExpress or Amazon and things like that, so I will try and remember to leave links for those things below. If I forget to include a link for something that I mentioned in the video, feel free to leave me a comment and I'll go ahead and add it. So I just wanted to point that one out here, and then there are any other notable ones here. Oh, it's interesting because they also have a colour called quinacridone red, which here they use a pigment called PR207, which is not a pigment I've really heard of before. Quinacridone red typically in other brands is either PR209, which I know Daniel Smith calls that quinacridone coral, or sometimes it's a PV19. They also have another colour called quinacridone cherry red, which is the more typical PR209 quinacridone red pigment that I'm used to. So that's just an interesting naming choice, I guess. They do have some very interesting naming choices for some of their other colours as well, as we'll go through, especially with the blues. There's definitely some interesting choices in terms of how they've named things. And another thing that I did, I went through, it's 126 colours on these swatch cards, and out of the 126 colours, 51 are single pigments, 35 of them are double pigments, another 35 are triple pigments, and 5 of their colours are 4 pigments. So lots of multi-pigment mixes with Mijello Mission Gold. However, they do offer a 24+2 tube set which is their Pure Pigment set, which is actually really good value for money for what you're getting, because you get 24 15mm tubes, 15ml tubes of Mijello Mission Gold single pigment colours, plus a tube of Chinese white and a tube of ivory black, I think in like 7ml tubes, but those aren't counted as part of the 24, so it's a 24+2 set. I actually got that. It was one of my very first sort of tube sets that I got when I first started out. This is my set. I've added a few extra colours since then. I added the sap green, turquoise blue, or peacock blue, I can't remember which one. What did I get? I got peacock blue and Prussian blue. So the sap green and peacock blue are mixes, but the Prussian is a single pigment, and so everything else on this is a single pigment colour, other than, like I said, these 2 wells of sap green and this peacock blue. So this was the Pure Pigment set that I got, and I will leave a link to the set that I bought from Amazon below this video. I have since sold the tubes. So basically I refilled this palette and then I sold what was left of the tubes. But most of the tubes still had a decent amount left in them. So, and by that point, I'd moved on to using other watercolors mostly. I don't use these paints as much, and I'll explain why a little bit later, but they were really good when I was a beginner. They don't move too much in wet washes, so they kind of stay where you put them, which when you're a beginner can be quite helpful when you're learning watercolors, to not have that surprise of not knowing how your paint is going to react. So I definitely would say it's a really good brand if you're a beginner, and also if you want really high pigment load color, because these are highly pigmented, some of the most pigmented watercolors I've ever worked with. They re-wet beautifully. You can see how glossy and shiny they are. These are all dry. They're still a bit tacky to the touch. They never completely set. I think they have honey in them. I can't remember now, actually. Let me just check the information here. I don't know if it says on here. It doesn't say, but I can't remember if they have honey in them or not, but they are incredibly pigmented and really easy to re-wet. The other thing that I really like about the Pure Pigment set, like I'm getting color all over myself now, is it includes a cobalt turquoise and a cobalt green deep, and these two pigments in other brands tend to be quite expensive paints, and there's also a cobalt blue as well. So the cobalt pigments tend to be quite expensive, so buying these particular pigments from other companies or other brands, open stock, can be quite expensive. So the fact that you get them as part of this set is actually really amazing, and makes it even more good value. So there again, on Jackson's, some of their paints open stock can be quite expensive per tube, but buying them in the sets is definitely more cost effective. I would definitely encourage you to go for the Pure Pigment set versus there's another set that Mijello do that's really popular, which is the set of 36 colors that comes with a palette. I think it's 36 colors in 7ml tubes. That includes a lot of their multi-pigment mixes, which not necessarily the best. Not great for mixing because they are multi-pigment mixes already, and you can get really unreliable mixes. But getting the Pure Pigment set is actually a really good way to learn about color mixing, which is definitely what I found when I used my set. So moving on to the next page of colors, we're going to the violets and then down into the blues. This one was an interesting one, Cobalt Violet Brilliant Light. It's one of their most expensive paints. It's a H series, but the pigment is PV102, and I've never heard of that pigment before, but it's a really pretty granulating color. And then down here, for example, Cobalt Blue No. 1 is actually a mix of ultramarine and phthalo blue, but then they do have a Cobalt Blue No. 2, which is the traditional cobalt pigment, PB28. They have an ultramarine deep, which is PB29 and PV15, so a ultramarine and a ultramarine violet. But then they have ultramarine light, which is just a single pigment ultramarine. So these are just things to keep an eye out for. Their cerulean blue is not actually cerulean, it's a phthalo blue green shade, PB15:3. They do have a cobalt cerulean blue, PB35, this is the more traditional cerulean color. So you can see the one they call cerulean blue really isn't the same as cerulean. And they also have the cobalt cerulean blue deep, which is my preferred variation of a cerulean. This is PB36. So these are both cerulean colors, they're cobalt pigments, but I prefer the saturation of the deep one. Then moving on to the greens and into the earth tones. Again, they have some interesting choices with the earth tones. They have Yellow Ochre No. 1, which is made up of PY42, which is yellow ochre, but they've also decided to add PY150, which is nickel azo yellow to it for some reason. But then they have Yellow Ochre No. 2, which is PY42, and then they also have Gold Ochre, which is also PY42, but the Gold Ochre is more transparent, so bear that in mind, I guess. They have a similar thing with burnt sienna. They have 2 versions of burnt sienna. And 2 versions of raw sienna, neither of which are a single pigment, and they're both incredibly different from each other. I would probably stay away from those personally. And then on the last page here we have one colour that's really interesting, is this cobalt black. It's a granulating black pigment, but it's PBK 27. It's not a colour it's not a pigment I've used before. And then we've got all their pastel colours, the ones mixed with white. Ignore this little splodge, and this here is where some paint transferred from a different card onto this swatch card. Then down into the greys, and then they've got 2 whites, Chinese white and titanium white. You can see the titanium white's definitely more opaque than the Chinese white. And then a couple of pearl colours, which are just a bit iridescent at the bottom there. I then went ahead and swatched some of these colours on cotton watercolour paper. In the end, I ended up re-swatching out 80 of the colours, so almost all of them. There's only 126 in the set, so I almost re-swatched everything. So let me just zoom you in a little bit so you can see the details a bit better. I'm not going to move these sheets around too much while I'm talking, so you can take a proper look at them as we go through. All the ones marked with an asterisk at the top, these are the ones that came in the Pure Pigment set that I received. So the only thing to bear in mind with the Pure Pigment sets, depending on where you are in the world, check which set you're buying or which colours are included in the set that you are buying, because I believe they have different variations of their Pure Pigment set based on where in the world you are. Like they'll have, there's one version that's sold in Asia, there's one version that's sold in Europe, etc, etc. So just some of the pigment, some of the color choices might be a bit different. So in the one that I got, I had lemon yellow, permanent yellow light, permanent yellow deep, autumn orange, permanent red deep, rose madder, quinacridone permanent rose, quinacridone permanent magenta, quinacridone violet, dioxazine violet, cobalt blue number 2, cerulean blue, which we talked about earlier is actually phthalo blue, ultramarine light, phthalocyanine blue, which is phthalo blue red shade, so you get both the green shade and the red shade, and ivory black and Chinese white. I didn't re-swatch Chinese white because it seemed a bit pointless. The only other colours that I have from Mijello Mission Gold at the moment is I have the autumn red, which I don't have in my palette because I only got this recently, and the permanent alizarin crimson, which is the same thing. I got that recently as well. But the other 2 that I have in the palette, I have peacock blue, Prussian blue, and where'd it go? Oh, I missed a page. I had it the wrong way around. And I had the sap green. Sorry, so the other colours that were in the Pure Pigment set, I missed the sheet. Cobalt green deep, viridian, bamboo green, cobalt turquoise, yellow ochre number 2, green gold, which is actually Nicolazzo yellow, but they call it green gold, burnt sienna 2, red brown, Van Dyke brown, and then it's the ivory black and Chinese white. The viridian and bamboo green are interesting because the viridian here is PG7, which is a phthalo green, blue shade, and then the bamboo green is a PG36, which is phthalo green, yellow shade. So with these 2 phthalo colours, depending on what you mix with it, you can actually get a whole host of different greens. And one thing that's really nice with the Pure Pigment set that I noticed anyway, is that it came, and I don't have it with me anymore, but it came with a leaflet, which when you open it up basically had all of it was like a printed sheet with all the different colours within the Mijello Mission Gold range, and it had all the pigment information on there as well. So it was a way for you, well for me, I used that as a way to be like, oh okay, so if I want to get an olive green, these are the pigments I need to mix together. So then I would go through my Pure Pigment set and I could pull out the pigments and practice mixing based on the mixes that they use for their multi-pigment mixed, convenience mixed colours. Shadow Violet I really like. This is a sort of a mix that I do myself a lot. I really like mixing PG7 and then a magenta or a red pigment, like PR 122, so that's a quinacridone magenta. They make a really beautiful neutral mix together, and depending on what the ratio is, it can either lean more green or more purple, and it's really a beautiful pair of mixing colors. I do really like that one, and that's sort of a mix I do independent. It's not a convenience color I would necessarily buy, but it is a mix I do fairly often that I really like. The indigo, I'm not the biggest fan of the Mijello indigo. It's a little bit flat looking. I do prefer the Payne's grey in comparison to the indigo. The Violet Lake, even though it's a mix, reminds me a lot of a Perylene Violet sort of colour, which is quite nice. And yeah, so here I wanted to show you the differences between the two cobalt colours that they have, or what they call cobalt. So cobalt number 1 and cobalt number 2, you can see they're very different. They also have peacock blue and marine blue, which on camera they look fairly similar, at least on my viewfinder, but in real life the peacock blue is ever so slightly more green than the marine blue. But they're both a really lovely sort of turquoise colour. They're fairly similar. Definitely would not need both. Yep, that's that for that page. And then the next page, I purchased the sap green separately and added it to my palette because it's a colour I use often, but I also really like the hooker's green and the olive green. And the thing is I mean, to be fair, I could and did mix the sap green from the single pigments I had, because I had both bamboo green, which is PG36, and the green gold, which is PY150, or at least what they call those colours. So I could easily mix this colour, but I was mixing it so much it actually made sense for me to have the tube. And then all I would have to do is for hooker's green, I would add a bit of PBR25, which is this red brown, which I also had in my single pigment palette. So just add a little bit of that to my sap green and I would get like a hooker's green. And then if I wanted to, I could also add a little bit of red. So they have a PR112, which is not a pigment that I got in my set. They do have which is permanent red, but I had permanent red deep in my set, so I would add a bit of that instead, and I'd get more of an olive color. So this is what I mean by like studying and learning about the pigments that go into your paints and the pigments that the company use for their convenience mixes. You can then go ahead and learn to make your own mixes and do some color mixing. So for example, I really like this. I think this Van Dyke green color is really pretty, but it's just a mix of PG7, which is this Viridian or Phthalo green, and PBR25, which is this red brown. I have both of these colors in my single pigment palette. I could very easily mix that green. Yeah, so it's just really nice to sort of practice with. And then going on to the last page, as has become very popular recently, these sort of pastel colors. Mijello Mission Gold also have a huge range of them. Holbein also do these colors, as do many other brands now. A lot of like the Korean and Japanese brands seem to do these, and Mijello Mission Gold is a Korean brand of paint. Sorry, I'm just trying to, I'm getting really out of breath with this, getting later in this pregnancy is definitely getting me out of breath. But these are like the very typical colours that you'll see: Jaune Brilliant number 1, Jaune Brilliant 2, Shell Pink, Brilliant Pink, Lilac, Violet Grey, Lavender, Verdita Blue, Blue Grey, Horizon Blue, Compose Blue. These are all very typical sort of pastel colours. I have another video which I did, which hopefully by the time this one comes out, that video will have already been released, where I set up a pastels palette and I sort of custom mixed some of these on my own. So you can always go and check that out, and if that video is released, I will try and remember to link it below. But depending where you purchase your paints from, sometimes buying the Mission Gold version will be cheaper than buying Holbein, or sometimes maybe another brand like Shinhan might be cheaper than Mission Gold or whatever. So it's worth checking out if you are interested in these sorts of colours. And yes, those are the ones that I chose to re-swatch on cotton paper, and you can see how vibrant they are. And I got all of these from those dot cards that I'd already swatched once before, and a lot of them still have a ton of paint on them. So there's definitely a lot on these. I feel like they're very generous dot cards in terms, I mean, some of them are completely gone, like the sap green, there's nothing really left there. The cobalt turquoise, there's not much left. A lot of them are completely used up, but a lot of them still have plenty of paint on them as well. So pros and cons with this brand, in my opinion. The pros: highly pigmented, very saturated colors. You get tons of bang for your buck, essentially. Yeah, really high tinting strength colors. But the con side of that is it can be quite hard to control in terms of, like, you will just get really, it doesn't take much to get really strong pigmented color onto your brush. So if you want more subtle colors and stuff, you have to learn water control quite early on and learn how much pigment to water ratio you need, and that just comes with practice more than anything else. Another thing I've noticed with these paints, now it's not showing up on this paper, which is amazing, but for example, this is the swatch card I have for my palette, which is done on different paper. I can't remember what paper this was done on. Can't remember if it was cotton or not, but I'm not sure if you can see at the bottom here. It kind of has a bit of a speckling on some of the paper, and I've noticed with this brand that it tends to happen the most with this brand on different types of paper than with others. You kind of get that little speckling effect through the paint. I'm not sure what causes that exactly, but it's just something to bear in mind. It doesn't always happen, and like I said, it's not happened at all on these swatches that I've done. I was kind of thinking it would, to be honest, because I've experienced it so often. But this is swatched on Saunders Waterford 100% cotton, cold press or rough, I can't remember, watercolor paper, and it's not doing that at all, which is great. So I did a couple of sample paintings last night in my Cuddy sketchbook just to be able to show you. So I did this very simple floral piece using just 5 colors from the set that I have. I used my palette here. So I used the quinacridone permanent magenta, Prussian blue, sap green, red brown, and permanent yellow light to do this. Like I said, very simple sort of floral piece. And then I also did this sort of like rainbow of leaves pattern. It was quite late at night when I was painting this, and I just needed something simple, but just wanted to show how vibrant the colors are. And again, this is a 100% cotton rough watercolor sketchbook. It's a Cuddy paper sketchbook. I really like it for loose watercolor paintings and things like that. And yeah, so that's how those turned out, to give you a bit of an idea of how they work in an actual painting setup, I guess. There you go. All right, I think that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions about Mijello Mission Gold or anything else you wanted to ask me about my experience with these paints, like I said, I've been using them for a couple of years now, on and off, more so at the beginning of my painting journey than now. But I still have this palette. It is super pigmented. I do reach for it every now and again. My daughter really loves playing with these paints as well. They're like, I only let her use them for like quote unquote special occasions or special paintings. I did this flower painting with her recently. One second, let me grab it. A video for this on the channel as well. It was a really quick little after school painting session we had, and she painted this using my Mijello Mission Gold paints. I gave her a big sheet of paper and a big paintbrush, and so I got out that palette because it has big wells and she could easily grab what colours she wanted, and she painted this, which I really love. I'm thinking about cutting it down and framing it for the baby's room. Her first piece of artwork from her big sister, which I thought would be quite cute. So yeah, anyway, that's enough rambling from me for today. I will see you guys in another video soon, and until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon. All right, bye.